Welcome to another of eGov's Floor Talks. We're very lucky to be joined today by Dr. Santhosh Mathew. Dr. Mathew is currently at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which he joined after close to 3 decades, actually more than 3 decades of service in the IAS. 14 years of that period was with the government of Bihar, where he has worked across a variety of functions and departments, including health, finance, education, agriculture, industries, labor, social work, and rural development. He has also worked with the government of India in the ministries of rural development and human resource development, and then with the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex, first as a PhD student and then as a tutor as well, and as a professor of social management at the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Administrative Academy in Missouri. Before Gates Foundation, he was also the country director of Rockefeller Foundation's Leadership for Environment and Development program in India. He retired from the government of India in October 2017 as chairperson of the National Council for Teacher Education and additional chief secretary with the government of Bihar. Dr. Mathew is a friend and a champion and a supporter of eGov's work, and we've benefited greatly from his advice, even as we look at new frontiers that eGov can explore. And I'm sure we'll have a lot to learn and a lot to look forward to in this talk. So without further ado, over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to spend some time with all of you. If there is one thing that excites me
look at graphs,
about this opportunity, it is the chance that I get to convince you that you should live up to your name.
We had nodes, and then those nodes can have 2 children, binary trees.
Sorry, can you hear? Something else is coming through. Can you all hear?
Money, you're on mute.
In terms of how to
Money.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as I was saying is that the reason why I'm so excited about this opportunity to spend some time with all of you is because it gives me a decent chance at convincing you that you need to live up to your name. And that is of being an e-government foundation. As you know, I'm a friend and a great admirer of your work. And the reason why I feel that your work is so important, given the context that India is in today, is what I will try and spend some time discussing. So why do I think your work is so important? If you look at India's development history, pre-independence, time of independence, post-independence, and all these decades that we have been an independent nation, you will immediately recognize that right from the beginning, it has been a coalition of the elite. And that coalition has been built and helped India sustain itself and remain a united country for all these years, and in the process made substantial progress. But if you look at the nature of politics during this period, there were 3 things that actually cemented or drove politics, or were the currencies in the electoral market. And these 3 things I would call as, in a regression equation, if you have independent variables on the right side and the dependent variable on the left side, then I would call them as x1 and x2, 2 independent variables. And x1 is the coming together of a trifactor. And that trifactor is patronage. That trifactor is exploitation of cleavage. And that trifactor is money power. It, frankly, if you ask me, it has served India well. It has kept us together and enabled us to make the progress that we have made. But what has happened over the last 2 decades maybe, and sharpening every day as we move ahead, is the realization that these three things alone is not enough to secure electoral victory. Of course, things will vary from election to election. It will vary from geography to geography. The more affluent a place is, the more literate a place is, the more mobile a place is, it has implications on the salience of patronage. It has implications for the salience of money power, and it has implications for the salience of exploitation of cleavage. But what is X2 then in this regression equation that I laid before you, which is another trifactor, which is prosperity, which is public service delivery, and the other is good governance. It is my thesis and my firm belief, based on spending so many years both inside and outside of government. I mean, I may have spent over 3 decades allegedly inside government, but half of that time was actually spent outside government. And it is this insider-outsider perspective which is giving me the courage to stand before you and to make this assertion that X2 is salient. It is increasingly becoming salient, but has not had the power to replace X1. Therefore, if you ask me what is my role today over the next 10 years and what I think your role should be over the next 2 decades, is to live up to your name and truly be an e-government foundation which facilitates the transition of Indian politics from one in which the center of gravity is X1 to another where the center of gravity is X2. Now, I have carefully chosen the words center of gravity because calling it a center of gravity enables us to accommodate other things that are actually circling around. So it is not my case that patronage, cleavage, and money power will cease to be important. It's just that we need to shift the center of gravity. This is my first sort of proposition for your kind consideration. My second proposition for you, for your kind consideration, is that reform inside government is possible when 3 things come together. And for this understanding and the sharpness of what I'm going to say, I owe it to Mr. Anil Swarup, under whom I had the great privilege of working when I was chairman of the National Council for Teacher Education. And Mr. Swarup was the secretary in the Department of School Education. And he calls this the co-occurrence of 3 things, which is political salience, financial viability, and administrative desirability. So politics, finance, and administration. It is when these 3 things co-occur that you get the maximum purchase, the maximum speed, and that's your sweet spot when you can push through things that otherwise is very difficult to do. The mistake that intellectuals of certain genre make, and certainly big philanthropy organizations make, and even the political leadership sometimes seems to make, is that in a complex country like India, that you can actually change the course of history, i.e., that you can make these 3 things co-occur. I'm not so sure that that's a valid proposition. Now, if I am hesitant that we cannot make these 3 things co-occur, then you may ask me, what are you doing here? I mean, why are you here? Why are you engaging with this debate? My take on this is that more importantly than my belief that we cannot make these 3 things co-occur, I think the problem that we face is that when it co-occurs, we do not have the ability to spot or to recognize that has co-occurred. And that is why partnerships with people like me, when I was in government, of people like you who are outside government, and you have something extremely critical, the ability to do something extremely critical for the future of India in your hands that you need to deploy. But I'll get there in a while. So the second proposition I said I want to place before you is the importance of the co-occurrence of political salience, financial viability, and administrative desirability. It's fairly intuitive, I imagine, for us to understand the importance of this. Now, the point is, this is clearly a rare event. And even as it is rare, it is even rarer that we have people who can spot it. But what's more important is that if it has occurred, and if you have managed to spot it, how long does this period actually exist? Now, you will say elections is once in 5 years. So 5 years, isn't that what you have? My answer is no. In fact, if you look at the history of chief ministership and prime ministership in India, no prime minister or chief minister expected more than a full term. In fact, many of them don't even expect to complete the term. Certainly for ministers, they don't expect, because there are reshuffles of cabinet. There are reshuffles of political affiliation, and there are reshuffles of coalition politics. So my long experience of working with ministers and chief ministers is that their typical time zone is an 18 to 24 month window, full stop. You take anything to them that is longer than that, or which is not practical to be executed within this time period, they have no appetite. But if you want them to, so time is, so the length of period or the time within which you have to execute this, my proposition that I'm laying before you is 18 to 24 months. That makes it extremely restrictive in what all you can achieve, especially when the foundations or the building blocks of the Indian state itself is so fractured that you need a much longer window of opportunity to set those basic building blocks right. So this is, for me, this is a very basic sort of a fracture or a very basic structural problem in our ability to progress and effect change. The third construct that I want to place before you is that even if you have political salience, financial viability, and administrative desirability, and you are willing to reach out and work in partnership with reform champions in government, you need governments to do three things for you. And I will mention them in the increasing importance of, in the degree of increasing importance. Number one, you will need government to invest, put finance, put money, put budgetary allocation behind a range of solutions. Least important, but important. Number two, you will need government to deploy extremely scarce bureaucratic talent in service of solving the problem. That's more important than money. And the most important, which is the third thing, is that you will want government to give you the right decisions in a timely manner, which basically means the political leadership will need to engage with you to give you the decisions that are required to move the needle on your reform agenda. Now, if you look at these three sort of basic building blocks that I have placed before you, I am hopeful that you will recognize why getting reform done in government is such a difficult enterprise. But here's what I want to tell you. It's not impossible. It's been done before. It can be done again. And I would call this the constellation of forces aligned around the persona of Nandan Nilekani, of which you as the e-government foundation are an important part. And so is eGov an important part. And people like me who subscribe to the view that shared digital infrastructure is an important aspect of making what are otherwise extremely desirable changes in the Indian state, moving it from the realm of too big to solve, too difficult to do, and we can't do it in 24 months, moving it from that sort of basket to the basket of it being a feasible political enterprise. I want to give you an example to make this a little real. And as you can imagine, given my Bihar sort of background, that was my cadre where I was born for 32 years. I will give you the example of what happened in the sector of electricity. When Chief Minister Nitish Kumar went public and made a statement, many of us thought that he was committing political suicide. What was it that he went out on a limb and said? He said, I will not come to you and ask you for your vote if I do not give you quality electricity 24 hours a day to your homes. And imagine, he said that at a time when the Bihar State Electricity Board was broken, had no money, had no engineers, had no capacity, no talent, nothing. But he goes and makes that statement. Then what does he do? He then secures some of the best bureaucratic talent that Bihar had, deploys that to the problem. He then engages with the problem, providing the right decisions, the financial backing, and in a period of 4 years, completely transforms Bihar's electricity sector. And it is my understanding that alongside the work he did and the politics he did around women's empowerment and the self-help group movement is what enabled him to claw back to power despite many people and many political parties being actually working against him in the last elections. Now, let me go back. These are the sort of basic propositions. Now, let me add some color, particularly the X1 and the X2 thing that I started with. You will notice that, a lot of my discussion today is actually what I'm trying to do is to convince you of the importance of your mission, of how critical it is that what you do it well, and why you need to take the risks you need to take, because you are having a unique place in India's development history. And that's why I'm going to spend a lot of time here. So bear with me, please. Now, if you look at the X1, X2 regression equation that I laid before you, and I told you that there is a movement that is discernible in Indian politics where the salience of X2 is slowly emerging, and you juxtapose that with the incentive structure and the reality that individual politicians, either who are in positions of leadership like the Prime Minister or the Chief Minister or a cabinet minister in the state or in the union, or you are an MP or an MLA, and you look at it from their lens, from their perspective, you will find that it is an extremely difficult transition for them to shift their individual politics or their party's politics from being heavily dependent on X1 to be able to shift to X2. And why is that? Let me give you the analogy of a trapeze artist. So in a circus, what a trapeze artist basically does is that she or he moves from one swing to the other, and the crowd gets excited when she is hung in the mid-air, where she has left swing A and is reaching out to swing B, but have not yet caught on to swing B. It is that suspended animation which is so fraught with risk that gives the adrenaline rush to the audience, and they clap and they come back and they pay more money. Now, the thing in a trapeze artist is that if you have left swing A and you're reaching out for swing B and somehow you miss, then you fall, but you have a safety net at the bottom. But in politics, particularly in Indian politics, if you leave X1 and you are trying to embrace X2 and you fall short, i.e., you are not able to grip X2 adequately, not only will you fall to near certain political death. Why? Because there is no safety net at the bottom. Put yourself in the shoe of an Indian politician. If this is the choice that is in front of you, how many of us would have the courage to leave X1, which is working for them? Remember, it's probably increasingly becoming irrelevant, or rather you need a more smattering of X2 to be able to retain that. But just imagine that this X1, X2 dichotomy and the perils of falling to near certain political death is the choice if you are confronted with. How many of us would have the courage to leave X1 and jump onto X2? It is our failure to appreciate the near-death consequences of a failure of this kind that we as middle-class individuals in a growing India, we somehow keep saying there is no political will. Where is the political appetite? And this is where you come in. This is where you as the eGovernment Foundation comes in. This is where you use the experience and the code and the change management insights that you have had by your extensive work and tremendous success in urban to take it to other spheres. Your success in the urban sector, I believe, is because you took a risk. You do not have a single customer government or a single customer urban local body when you set apart on your journey to build what now you very proudly call Digit. But you believed in your theory of change. You believed that the time would come. You went out on a limb. You took the risks supported by Nandan's philanthropy, and you took certain steps. So when the political, financial, and administrative circumstances so coalesced that a reform champion actually who had less than 24 months to effect change actually wanted to effect change, you were there. I repeat, you were there. You made what would otherwise have been an impossible project to pursue. You made it practical. You made it possible. Don't underestimate the circumstances and the risks that you took. Today it's very easy to bask in your success and to say, and you should smell the roses because you're in a great place. But don't forget the risks that you took in that journey. And it is the same risk that you need to take now. Because who else in India has got the experience of managing change? Who else in India have got the gumption or experienced going out on a limb, building shared digital infrastructure and making it work? It's just you. Now, this is not to say that shared digital infrastructure is going to solve for all of India's problems. Far from it. In fact, I would urge, if there is anybody in your group who has not read Atul Gavande's checklist manifesto, I advise them to read it. Gavande has this very nice sort of a breaking down. Again, I'm sorry, everything is coming up, 333. He divides problems or tasks or solutions, etc., into three, right? Simple, complicated, and complex. Now, why I find that a very interesting sort of division is because almost everybody who engages with the Indian state mistakenly believes that 80% of India's governance problems are in the nature of complex problems. Now, just to remind you of Gavande's classification, simple is easy, it's exactly what it means. The problem is actually differentiating between what is complicated and what is complex. For many decades, we thought, and the example that Gavande uses is that of flying a very complex bomber in the World War II situation, where Boeing had come out with this very complex but fantastic aircraft. And everybody was sure that that's the aircraft that the American Air Force would pick in a multi-billion-dollar contract. But that was not to be, because when the final flights were being done, the plane crashed. And on investigating that crash, they came up with, believe it or not, the same conclusion that most politicians in India come up with and most bureaucrats concur, and it's too complicated a solution. So that was a too complicated of plane to fly. But when they set their heart to it and they introduced a checklist, they were able to transform a complicated operation to one in which ordinary pilots could fly and fly with safety and effectiveness. People who know J.R.D. Tata from many years ago used to say that when J.R.D. got on a flight from Mumbai to New York, he used to, sitting in first class, ask, who is the pilot? The J.R.D. Tatas who fly transcontinental today never asked the question, who is the pilot? Because in those days, you needed a very good pilot to fly that plane. On his or her hands depended the safety of your flight and the comfort of your journey. But what have they done? They transformed what was thought to be a complex exercise in flying, first introduction of checklist, but then going on to understanding that it is just a complex, or rather, I won't use the word complex, it's just a very large number of if this then that algorithms that flying is all about. And therefore they were able to algorithmize it. And what, if you actually Google for this term called RAC, by the way, which is not reservation after cancellation, which is what the Indian Railways offers you, this is rules as code. There's an entire movement in the governance sector about RAC, which is rules as code. And flying today, what's called fly-by-wire, or what driving today, which is autonomous cars, is simply rules as code. If this is the altitude, this is the temperature, this is the speed, then this is the thrust and this is the flap. That's it, simple. But then you have the sensors in place, you have the data feeds in place, you have the pattern recognition algorithms in place, which is quickly, in a fraction of a second, able to give you the two decisions that you need. How much thrust, what degree flap. That's all. There's nothing more in flying. Of course, there is the undercarriage when it needs to go down, when it needs to go up. And the flap is on the wing. Then there's that other thing at the tail, which also moves. I don't know what the name is. So there are just these four things, and that's it. How much of these four things you need to vary is all there is to flying. But J.R.D. Tata and many people of that era thought it was complex. Like we today think the Indian state is complex. But people like me who have been educated by people like you now realize that not even 10% of the Indian state is complex. It lends itself to an enormous degree of straight-through processing of rules as code. Now, what is the magic that can happen when you actually break down our governance problems into simple, complicated, and complex? Is the following. One is you will find, and that's my hypothesis, and I'm spending a lot of time thinking about this, is that if you have a simple or a complicated problem, you can write code. You can put in place shared digital infrastructure to solve for it. And if it is complex, then you need to find the best of bureaucratic and political talent to solve for it. But today, what is it? We know that talent infrastructure is a normal curve, right? It's a bell-shaped distribution where extremely high quality talent lies to the right side of the distribution, which is a small number. Similarly, extremely poor talent lies to the left side of the distribution, which is again small. But where the majority of the distribution, which is majority of the people, the talent where it lies, is in the middle of the distribution. But what are we saying? We are saying that no. All the talent lies in the middle, but we want everybody to be on the right side of the distribution. Why? Because 80% of the problem is complex. Just imagine the kind of screw up we are in, leading to the kind of frustration that today our Indian politics, our Indian administration, and you and me as concerned citizens are experiencing. Is just the very inability to look hard at problems and increasingly determine what all can be processed away as rules as code, which is simple and complicated. You do two things. One is that you allow ordinary people to man your systems and do it successfully. And number two, your high quality talent you can deploy where it's really needed, which is in those class of problems 8 to 9 to 10%, which is truly complex. Today, we have a complete misallocation of talent, where the best of talent is today engaged in solving complicated problems. What a waste of the most precious sort of resource that we have, which is talent. But who can fix it? You can fix it. You can fix it through making this a practical to do, not too difficult to solve problem. Within the 24, imagine the Ford Motor Car Company or Maruti Suzuki. Imagine if its marketing strategy was that, listen, here is the drawing of the car. I will send the drawings as large posters to all my dealership. And I will invite customers to come and view these drawings. And then I will tell them, you give me 95% of the cost of building this car as an advance. Then in 5 years' time, I will give you the car. If that was the promise, Maruti Suzuki would have gone broke, would have sold even a single car. So when philanthropists and when people who are in the development sector ask this question, where is the buy-in? It's almost equal to saying that, listen, drawing hai, to where is my customer? Let's stop being the failed Maruti and let's start being the successful Maruti. Let's build out the cars we believe in. Let's give them a test drive. 3 people test drive your car, 1 may buy it. But that one person who buys it will then send electricity through the system. And we all know it's a hockey stick, very slow. And then when it catches fire, it sets the house on fire. That is the nature of statecraft, particularly with reference to governance reform. And that's why you as eGov Foundation are a crucial part of India's future, in terms of making available the shared digital infrastructures that will convert an otherwise impossible to do within 24 months politics, finance, and administrative willing possibility from really taking shape. And I also talked to you about the choice that the political class feels. If it feels that this is something that they cannot do in 18 months and take political credit for it, you wouldn't do it, would you? Why do you expect them to do it? And because of this failure, you will find that India is able to solve one kind of problems. You know, you can build roads. I mean, Gadkari ji was celebrating 35 kilometers per day. Tomorrow, I'm sure he will celebrate 40 kilometers per day. But what happens to health and education, sir? Nobody is even touching it. Why? Because it's not a feasible thing as it's currently constructed. Why? Because you need everybody in health and education to be solving complex problems, when 98% of health and education are actually only complicated and simple. This is the proposition that I want to sort of leave you with at this stage, and maybe deal a little bit with the kind of questions that are here, or whatever else that Viraj and Amia, etc., will have lined up for me. I'm singing for my supper, literally, so you can make me dance.
Thanks. Santhosh, maybe 5 minutes on public finance management transformation work that we've been doing with you. Just maybe.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thank you. So what is the importance of public finance management in the construct that I laid before you? In fact, I would say it is just not public finance management. There is another, because the power of public finance comes from its ability to be a forcing function. Number one. There is another animal in the same zoo which has the same power, and that animal is called the annual performance appraisal record. It's got the same power. What is the power of public finance? Is because the blood that flows through the veins and arteries of government is actually money. It's cash. Money you pay to people as salary, money you pay to service providers as fees for goods and services delivered. All of that is money. So what does public finance really do for you? Public finance, if properly constructed, can actually bring about the kind of changes. In fact, let me just show you a small, I want to project something. Let me just share screen. Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing. So can somebody make that possible?
Neetu? Ramaya?
Yeah, we'll just make Dr. Mathew a co-host. 1 second.
Santhosh sir, can you try now? I've been made the co-host.
Yeah, done. It's working. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Where is this? Show all windows. Okay, I'll do screen. And then I'll show this. Share. And then I'll share the screen. Can you see this diagram? Can you all see this diagram?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Maybe not all of it, right? Now, can you see?
Yeah, full thing is visible right now.
Okay, thank you. So to give practical shape to the kinds of reform that's actually required, and that's where public finance comes in very important, is that I'll just draw your attention to these 3 circles, okay? This circle has got FE1 to FE4, and FE stands for basically frictionless expenditure. That's what this particular box, the circle is all about. And AB stands for administrative burden, and here AB5 to AB9. And on the right side here, you have HA, which is high accountability, and high accountability 10 to 15. Basically, what I have done, or Devesh and I have done, is that we have boiled the ocean and come up with 15 things that need to be done to be able to get the Indian state functional again. And they are basically around three things: frictionless expenditure, low administrative burden, and high accountability is what it's really about. And here, what we have done in these dotted circles, connected to each of these colored circles, we have talked about what is the shared digital infrastructure that needs to get built to be able to solve. So for example, FE 1 to 4 will require, there's 1 to 4 requires an IT workflow program for program management. FE1, data only from the primary unit of activity, it requires registries. FE2, which is machine-to-machine exchange of payment requires open APIs by IFMIS and PFMS. So like this, for each of these things, we have actually drawn out what are the shared digital infrastructure. So you can see the enormity of tasks that's remaining to be done. And those are in these dotted circles here, and that relate to each of these. Now, the magic of public finance is that when the finance department takes out a set of standards and says that I will give you money, which is your blood in your arteries and in your veins. I will give you money only if you report to me using the data standards I've set for you. That's what in iFix you're engaged in. Nobody in government can actually make this statement for all of government. As Principal Secretary, Rural Development, perhaps I can make that statement to my district collectors and to my deputy development commissioners. But again, I'm stuck. Why? Because half, or rather 80% of the schemes I administer are Government of India centrally sponsored schemes. Therefore, my latitude that I have, the flexibility that I have to stand there and dictate new things is limited. But if the finance secretary of Bihar stood there and said, listen, I need you to tell me not how many people were vaccinated, but who were these people who were vaccinated? And I want those names to come from a registry. I want you to tell me the lat long of the position in which that vaccination took place. I want you to tell me the time when it happened. And then if you give me this, then I will calculate what the cost should have been and compare that with what you report as the cost. It's because the finance ministry will set the standards through a shared digital infrastructure called iFix that you are going to make it possible for the entirety of government through the good offices of finance secretaries or chief secretaries or chief ministers or prime ministers, make in one sweeping stroke half of these problems solve itself out. Because if you really want low administrative burden, if you really want high accountability, for example, one of the things in HA is called, HA10 is called trust scores. Now, if you want trust scores, what we argue is that you will need to know, you need to have observability. If you know the names of people who were vaccinated or immunized, and the health department is telling you that 25 people were immunized, you can actually use statistical methods to run a sample, to pick out a sample that has the power to predict the population, do an independent back check, and determine who is lying by how much. The same way that Google Maps was built through, people just contributing. And Google Maps or Google using the map maker, Katragada, I mean, your own Bangalore sort of a citizen of Bangalore, that's all. He just set up a trust infrastructure. Now, why can't these fabulous ideas that are so normal in your lives not be marshaled for governance? Now, if you want to marshal that for governance and improve governance, and improve data fidelity, then you need to make data observable. But observable is one thing, but observable in a machine readable format, in an interoperable format is another thing. So what in iFix you will do when you succeed is that you are going to weaponize the finance departments and the finance secretaries in a manner that completely transforms the possibilities that will exist to deploy many of these ideas you see in this diagram. Now, I do not know how many of you know that the economic survey brought out by the finance ministry every year, in the 2015-16 edition, they have an entire page talking about India's expenditure architecture. It also puts a number, and it says 1 trillion rupees is today lying, and I repeat, it's 1 trillion rupees is today lying as wasteful float inside the system. Now, you may say, what's so big about 1 trillion rupees? We are a multi-trillion, economy. How does a trillion here matter? Because the interest cost of trillion is not much. Actually, interest cost of trillion is actually not much. It's only a few thousand crores. But the problem is much more severe. I used to work in finance in government of Bihar. I was the expenditure secretary, which means every secretary in government of Bihar had to come to me for money. So when the health secretary used to come to me for money, I used to tell him, are you all right? You have still not spent the 800 crores that I gave you a quarter ago, and you're coming and asking me for more money. Now, if you scale that up to government of India, when the health secretary government of India, Rajesh Bhushan, goes to the finance secretary or expenditure secretary here, TB Somnath, and asks for money, that's exactly what TB will tell Rajesh. Because what is the problem that Rajesh is encountering? Rajesh has got a system of financing through which he actually gives money to state governments in advance and says, spend it. You spend 60%, I'll give you the next tranche. But then, as you know, there are varying degrees of state capacity, interest. Somewhere election is going on somewhere, somebody has died somewhere, there's a riot somewhere, there's a COVID somewhere, all sorts of things are happening in India, right? But typically that happens is that at the end of the year, 4,000 to 5,000 to 6,000 crores is what the health ministry is systematically underspending. In fact, there is no ministry in government of India which is not underspending, except maybe your Gadkari-led roads or something, things like that. But where money is given to states, what typically happens is that your Andhra and your Tamil Nadu and your Kerala will spend the money and start asking you for more. Your UP and your Bihar and your Chhattisgarh and your Madhya Pradesh will be sitting on tons of money and not having spent it. The Secretary Government of India's ability to report to finance saying, listen, our money spent is not there because half the fellows are sitting on money and half the fellows don't have money. So it is a typical case of poverty and plenty coexisting. And in government, nobody will try pulling back money because as it is, our accounting system is completely broken. If you pull back money and give, you're actually what is already, n to the power x sort of complicatedness. You are actually, it is n to the power 2x is the kind of complicatedness that you would introduce. So nobody's even going to try that, forget it. So the point that I'm making is that this kind of financial re-architecting with observability at its core is what iFix is going to make possible when you get really going. Similar, if you would step out and think of the annual performance appraisal record being another artifact that you want to invest in, it has exactly the same power as iFix. Because you can say that the personal secretary will lay down the rules that no performance appraisal of any, there are 25 million government servants in India, the performance appraisal of no government official can happen till the data is reported from the primary unit of activity, machine aggregated, and automatically through APIs populates those parts of the performance appraisal where there are goals and the goal setting has happened and the achievement will be taken only from here, these two have exactly the same powers. And in fact, both would be required to really complete the circle. It is in that sense that your current engagement with public finance has the power to be so transformative. But again, let's also be humbled by the fact that this is a necessary condition, but not by far sufficient. Viraj.
Yes. Yeah, no, thanks so much. Amey, any questions people have? We've got 10 minutes to go.
If anyone has a question, they're welcome to either type into chat or raise a hand. I think we have one from PRK. With state treasury having...
I can see that. I can see that. Let me take that. So thank you. So PRK has this thing, will the state treasury having online PFMS release funds only, will this solve the idle issue money problem? Yes and no. If you can shift everything to the state treasury, then the problem gets solved. But the problem is the solution may be worse than the problem. And the reason is the state treasury architecture, if you actually look at it very carefully, is an artifact that should have gone a decade ago. It serves no useful purpose. The state treasury, it does only three things, which is basically you have a state, you have basically these treasuries are, district treasuries, sub-district treasuries, and so on. And what happens in a treasury basically is that you give allocations to department, drawing and disbursing officers will come with information of the expenditure they've incurred. They will produce a bill to the treasury officer who will check for only three things. One, there is money available in your allocation. Two, the codal requirements. What's a codal requirement? Is like you are booking that expenditure against the right head of account. And three, are you the person who's authorized to draw money against that head of account? The only three things that a treasury officer does. But this is what he does formally. Informally, he also takes a bribe for passing each bill and passes it on to whoever it has to go to. But I'm here not talking of the informal. It's called a wet posting versus a dry posting. Now, and very often, you must have also heard there's something called prepaid and postpaid, right? In telecom, in mobile phones, prepaid. So we also have prepaid corruption, postpaid corruption. So treasury officer, excise inspector, sub-registrar, where, you go to register land. These are all prepaid sort of corruption sites where you actually pay money to get posted there. And then you give a hafta or a mahina to maintain yourself in that. So you have, fixed expenditure and, variable expenditure. So the point here is a computer algorithm does these three things much better than a treasury officer. So frankly, once PFMS is kicked in and PFMS has got these three things, then a drawing and disbursing officer can technically directly interact with your, it's not PFMS, you need IFMS, because PFMS is simply a pipe in which you have observability. That's all there is. PFMS in that sense is a very limited creature, which is useful, but it's been sort of bandied about as a solution to all problems. It's the beginning of the solution, but it's not yet the solution. So you need a mating between the IFMS properly, constructed with PFMS and several other, payment entities. And most importantly, the decision to pay, which is really the Achilles heel of government in India and the risk associated with that decision to pay. In fact, people believe mistakenly that DBT and PFMS has actually solved many of these problems. But frankly, it has solved all the problems that used to occur after you decide to pay. But the problems that lie before that decision to pay and up to the decision to pay have not been solved. And that's why you still have all the problems associated with that. So the point, a pointed answer to your question is that PFMS will not solve it. You need an IFMS, you need it to be mated to the PFMS, and you need to get rid of the state treasuries so that the drawing dispersing officer behaves with the IFMIS in the same way that she behaves with a bank account. In a bank account, you can do an internet transaction provided you fulfill the conditions for that transaction. Are you the authorized person? Login password. Is there allocation? Is there money in the account? Are you booking it against the current thing? Basically, are you giving the right remarks on that? But that's not something the bank cares about because the bank wouldn't. But then that would what a ledger also do to an account. So you have to make the treasury system mimic the flexibility of a banking system. And you can do that only if you get rid of the rent seeker called a treasury officer and all the 10 people sitting around him who are basically the people who deal with that, hafta. And actually hardwire the IFMIS and the PFMS and the decision to pay together. That's when you get the solution. That's how I'd answer that question. Then there is another question on the point of keeping our head down and working on a good Maruti, which will automatically sell, given that it will not automatically sell. I mean, that's not what I said. Given that development sector is dependent on philanthropic money, is it still important that the sector has political, at least bureaucratic visibility to make progress in the 2 year? Yeah. So see, the point is that visibility and all these things will get us only up to a point. Marketing cannot sell a car that doesn't exist, no? Or good marketing should not lead to mis-selling, no? Because in the third iteration, nobody will buy your product. So first of all, you need the imagination, then you need the product, and then you need visibility, and then you do marketing. So and that's why your role is, even how long did it take you to get Digit even to this particular level? That's the hard work. That's why you need the coming together of subject matter specialists, finance specialists, and people who can code like hell. And that's why they say that health and education today is not going to be solved by teachers or doctors. You need the coming together of public finance, of people who understand, behavior, human behavior, subject matter expertise, accountancy. A lot of this needs to come together, and a lot of digitization. I mean, what did Uber and Ola do for the personal transportation industry? It really enabled you. You were paying too much as a customer. The driver was getting too little, and capital could not be invested because of all the information asymmetries and inefficiencies that existed, right? And then comes Uber and Ola and then solves for those efficiency problems, and then you have a thriving sector. But Ola, Amazon, Google, Uber have themselves become a problem for the world because they have themselves become monopolies for profit. In fact, now you will know, and I know all of you know, that Uber and Ola have started sucking the driver out. People who are earning 60,000 rupees a month are suddenly earning only 20,000 because they are eating that surplus up. So wherever there's a monopoly, there will be rent. And therefore, we are looking at in the transportation industry something that, and this is what Pramod is working on, right? How do you stitch together the Olas, the Ubers, and everybody else in the world so that consumers can exercise and providers can exercise true choice without being exploited by a monopoly provider like Google or Amazon or Ola or Uber? So that is the next level that you have to take to. But then when you work with government, which is, has got this, the other character of it not being profit-seeking monopolies, but I've got other inefficiencies. That is why extremely good quality coding, extremely good quality product design, extremely perceptive ways of solving for what I and Devesh have put out as those 15 enabling actions that need to get done. That's why it becomes important. Over.
So, Dr. Mathew, we're at 4 p.m. I wanted to check how we are for time.
I have a meeting at 4 o'clock, so people are waiting for me.
Okay, then Viraj, a few words of thanks, maybe.
No, it's always a pleasure. I can just keep listening to Santhosh talk because I think his combination of, intellect, experience, and the way he tells the stories from the ground is just a it's like 1 hour just gone so quickly. But just a big thank you. I think you coming in, talking about, sometimes we can be in the trenches and thinking, this is what we do well. I think coming from somebody like you, who's been in the administration, who's been in the philanthropic side, who's kind of, I jokingly say, half of the joint secretaries and principal secretaries in India have been Santhosh's students. So I think that kind of experience you bring. So I think for you to kind of exhort us to say, we need to think big, we have a unique role to play, it means a lot. And I can just add, Amaya, you said you've been a friend and philosopher. Sometimes he's been a forceful teacher also for us. I remember 2 years ago, we started working financial, iFix as a concept. And I said, no, we are busy doing urban. But I think he kept kind of, coming back to me and saying, think about it this way. And I think finally this has happened. And I think I can't thank you enough, Santhosh, personally for me, to expanding my horizon, how I should think about, engaging with the government about what eGov can do. I think truly you've been one of the we use the word catalyst a lot in eGov, right? But I think you've been one of the catalysts who has kind of made me think very hard about, reimagine what we can do. So thanks so much once again, and hope to see you soon once the COVID settles down.
Thank you, Virajan. Thank you, all of you from the eGov family, for the outstanding work you do on a daily basis. I know it's not easy, but what you do is extremely hard work, and I'm inspired by your commitment and what you produce. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.